Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon. This is John Suntress. Last weekend was Mainframe Comic-Con. It was terrific. There are going to be a ton of Word Balloons in the coming days featuring all the panels that I moderated, including today's episode. So be aware of that. And do me a favor, the Hero Initiative is a great cause. And as I say on the panels, the fundraising for the Hero Initiative has really been hampered by the cancellation of live conventions. More than 80% of their fundraising happens at conventions. Well, that ability is now gone, and that's why we stepped up with Mainframe Comic-Con to help make more awareness for fundraising for the Hero Initiative. So do me a favor, go to heroinitiative.org and donate what you can. They're a great organization that helps young and old creators in tough times. heroinitiative.org. Thanks a lot for listening to today's episode, and we'll be back with the show in just a second. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Ed Brubaker is back. He is here to talk about his graphic novel, Pulp, the collection of the latest criminal art, Cruel Summer, and his plans for a new graphic novel series that's going to start in December with Sean Phillips. It starts with the book called Reckless. Ed has had a lot of time during the virus to think about how to market books. He made some moves, for instance, working with Marcos Martin to create a new series Friday for Panel Syndicate, and has just been looking at the comic book market and how best to serve it. Not just in the local comic shops, but also in bookstores as well. And he talks a lot about the idea now that moving forward, he's only going to be putting out graphic novels, no more single issues. Talks about why. We really get into good details about the stories behind Pulp and Cruel Summer and Reckless, and Ed's thoughts moving forward in this ever-changing comic book market. Ed Brubaker on today's Word Balloon. It's all brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, for your great support via Patreon. Patreon.com/wordballoon. If you'd like to subscribe to Word Balloon, that's how you do it. Word Balloon is free. It'll always be free. But if you like what I do here and want to help out, you can subscribe to Word Balloon by supporting me via Patreon. Patreon.com/wordballoon. Word Balloon is also brought to you by Curiosity Stream, the great documentary streaming channel. And we've got a great Word Balloon deal on how to get Curiosity Stream for a year at just $14.99 that I'll be promoting later in the broadcast. Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. Aftershock is a great way to enjoy comics. They do genre-bending stories that deserve your attention from creators like Tim Seeley and Marguerite Bennett, and Phil Hester and Stephanie Phillips and Cullen Bunn and Paul Jenkins, and great stuff in the past from Brian Azzarello and Ray Fawkes, Mark Waid, among others, that are in the pantheon of Aftershock with great books that deserve your attention. Genre-bending ideas that combine science fiction and supernatural and westerns, you name it, all the genres that you love are being represented by great books from Aftershock. Go to their website, you'll find full story descriptions, preview pages of art, and the diamond codes on how to order these books through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. A really intense conversation with Ed Brubaker. Ed was here back in May and talking about previewing Pulp, previewing Cruel Summer, but he's made that announcement about Reckless, the brand new graphic novel he's doing with Sean Phillips. We get a lot of details about the new series and also why Ed is turning to graphic novels instead of monthly comics. Really interesting conversation with Ed Brubaker, and I'm happy to share it with you now on Word Balloon. A couple notes. We did this Skype audio. There was a little bit of scratchiness on my end. It sounds like I'm typing while I'm talking to Ed. I'm not. But Ed is crystal clear in his answers. My voice is a little muffled. My old computer crapped out on me right before Mainframe Comic-Con. So I had to end up doing the interview, recording it on my iPhone, and using an app on my iPhone as well. And it worked out fine. Like I said, Ed sounds great. I'm just slightly not as good as Ed's quality in the conversation. Eventually, that typing sound does go away, though. And again, a great, intense 2-hour conversation with Ed Brubaker on today's Word Balloon. Ed Brubaker, welcome back to Word Balloon. Always great to talk to you. And man, I'm thrilled that it's only been a couple months, and we talked about the debut of Friday. You teased Pulp. Pulp is out now, and it's been out for a week or so. And, I know we got Cruel Summer coming up, within hours of when we're talking, actually. But welcome back.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. When was the last time we talked? Like May?
Yeah, absolutely, man. No, and, Friday, the first issue of Friday had come out. And, again, I love, well, and we're going to talk about your plans with Sean for later this year. But, we can start with Pulp. And I got to say it, obviously, we're talking only a day after DC's craziness. And I mean, well, and honestly, what I love is your hero is a pulp writer and kind of dealing with, the life of a freelancer and stuff. Yeah. And I mean, the financial worries that he has are certainly ones that freelancers always have. It's kind of universal, but it is eerie timing given what's going on, I think, right now. And I couldn't help but think about DC as I was reading Pulp again for today.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was a bizarre day yesterday, just seeing all that news go on. And I mean, I'm on one level, I'm relieved I don't work there at all anymore.
Sure.
On another level, I'm like, I always try to remain hopeful. Like whoever's left, like maybe they'll be able to steer a way out of like whatever's going on right now. But it really feels like, like the end result of, these big corporations, like either buying these companies or finally starting to pay attention to them in the case of DC,
Yeah.
We didn't know how good we had it in the Paul Levitz era when he just wanted to keep things totally normal every time.
For real, man. And I mean, that's the thing. And again, in the case of Pulp, it's more from the freelancer's point of view of just the insecurities and not knowing, what's going to happen. And again, I mean, really, it's an old story from the Pulp standpoint. I mean, I think back, the period fascinates me, and you really capture it as far as, again, just the insecurities of not knowing when the next job is going to be, the vagrancies of an editor telling you, where I used to give you 3 cents a word, now it's, only 2 cents a word.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I had not known that the Westerns were so much more popular than some of the other pulps. Like I knew mostly like the crime pulps like Black Mask or like,
sure,
the hero stuff like Doc Savage and The Shadow and all the different, hero ones. But I didn't know that the Westerns at some point had sort of really just spread throughout the whole system. And, really, they were the ones that I think lasted the longest, like right up until the point where they just kind of switched to paperback originals.
That makes sense. But but then again, when you think about Hollywood too, and just how enduring the Western was, God, from the silent era right into television up through the 70s when it died out.
Yeah, totally true. Yeah, the early days of movies were a ton of Westerns, like silent film Westerns. I mean, Tex Ritter, his grandson is still on TV.
Right. You're right about that. Well, and I mean, literally one of the original makers of movies, Edison, I mean, great train robbery and all that stuff that he had done. I think he did a great train robbery, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was where like part of the story came from, was like finding out, when I was looking into like, what would you do if you were like a retired outlaw? I just started thinking about it and thinking about the idea of doing something that was more pulpy. And that was when I thought, okay, if you're a retired outlaw, like maybe you write about your own adventures because there's nothing else kind of like in your old age. And I remembered this, there was like at least one, I think 2 different books I read that were about different people who claimed to be like Butch Cassidy and Jesse James and tried to like sell like memoirs about being them that were so clearly fictionalized, like back in the like 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
Like years after they were supposedly killed. And so I always had that story in my head too, of like, it'd be interesting if like one of those guys actually was really the guy and, had sold like pulp adventures based on their actual life story. But yeah, I had no idea when, cause the book, was like literally sent to the printer the day that Diamond and the printer both shut down.
Okay.
So it was supposed to come out in like early May, and I had no idea that it was going to be like completely relevant book by the time we got around to actually publishing it.
Yeah, totally, man.
Everything about it. I mean, obviously, when you're even when you're writing a period piece, you're reflecting the world around you to some degree. You're writing about whatever, is concerning you that even subconsciously that you sort of want to write about. Like, I don't sit around, I write from character, really. I don't sit around going like, I want to write about such and such topic. But, whatever you're writing a period piece, you're writing about like what was going on in that era, and the parts of it that you're focusing on are the parts that you still identify with living in this era.
Sure.
So obviously, like the stuff about like the Nazi rally and all that, like that's just history. Like all that stuff happened.
Totally, American Bund, absolutely.
But
American, the Americans that were sympathetic.
Yeah, the Nazi Bund movement. Yeah, and they, and as we know, over the last, couple of years, there's been like various TV shows and documentaries about that stuff. So we know a lot more now. We talk about it a lot more now in the last few years than we probably did for the last like 30. Most people growing up don't, in America, don't think about the fact that there were like a bunch of people who lived here that were super pro-Hitler.
Yeah.
So like that stuff seemed, relevant to what was going on in our world to some degree, but it also just kind of felt like a very pulpy story. Like, old retired outlaw teams up with Pinkerton to rob the Nazis. Like that's a very pulp, one-liner.
Totally.
But to like take a story like that and then try to make it like a layered character, portrait was to me like, I wanted it to be both pulpy and feel like you were getting something more than that. So it was a lot of fun. But yeah, I had no idea when the book got delayed, like, because the pandemic hit and everything was getting delayed. And I thought, okay, well, for a few months, all we're going to be hearing about is this pandemic thing. And then by the time the book actually hits, it's like the whole world has changed. Like not just the pandemic, but like all the, Black Lives Matter protests and, all the right wing, like anti-mask protests. It's just like, it feels like the world has like gone insane, at least in America, where it just feels like some days we're on the like edge of like a civil war or something. And here I put out this book that's like, I mean, let's not forget LaGuardia spent, like put the whole police force out to basically protect the Nazis from the protesters. That day.
Wow.
Like, but he also, when Captain America came out, he also had to assign like a bunch of the police force to protect Marvel Comics from like the exact same Nazis.
Yeah, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby getting some. Yeah,
exactly. So same cops that were protecting that, stopping that protest from becoming a riot, basically. It's like this, just doing all the research for that was like really fascinating though. And I had a couple different people, like, well, more than a couple different people. And in fact, I think a couple like critics actually questioned the historical accuracy of what we knew or didn't know at the time that this story takes place. And it's like, they were calling into question that flyer that mentions concentration camps. And I'm like, that flyer is historically accurate. Like that's the actual flyer taken from the New York Times. It's like a photo of the actual protest flyer that was handed out all over New York City for like weeks before that rally. And thousands of people showed up. Like the world totally knew that concentration camps existed in 1939 and that Germany was sending people to them. They didn't know that they were death camps yet. They didn't know that for a few years. But that also was something that we knew like long before the end of the war. Like,
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, what we knew or didn't know. And it's like, no, we knew this stuff. This was in newsreels. Like we knew that like Jews and like the Rome people were being sent, and homosexuals. We knew all these people were being sent to like ghettos and concentration camps, So.
No, I remember reading about the Roosevelts and how Eleanor and her supporters were trying to get Franklin to do something immediately to help out and everything. Yeah, man. And no, it was
British intelligence and British intelligence like had information about the extermination camps in like early 41, like before we were even in the war, I think.
Yep.
Like, yeah, but it was weird. It's weird when you do a period piece because I do try to, I play fast and loose with like facts when I need to, but like I would never play fast and loose with the facts about the Holocaust.
Sure, of course, of course.
Like, Christ.
Yeah, man. No, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Well, and also again, these two.
I almost wanted to like reach out to every single one of those people and just be like, "You are incorrect." Like I had to put out a thing about it because I felt like I was getting email from readers too, and I was like, "Jesus, I don't want people to like think that I got this wrong, but I also want them to understand like the reality." So
I understand, man. When the HBO TV show Vinyl came out, I grew up here in Chicago, and I kind of thought they were playing fast and loose, starting not hip hop, but I guess the precursor to hip hop when DJs were mixing and stuff, and it was it was supposed to be like 1974 or whatever, and I'm like, wow, that just seems a couple years early. And then my New York friends are like, oh no, they got it right. It really was that far back, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. We just, it's just based on I remember thinking that too. And then, but yeah, there's a lot of documentary stuff about the early hip hop days in the last like 5 or so years that like point out the progression from those like party, dance.
Right. Well, even Ed Piskor, the Pittsburgh comic book creator, did his hip hop family tree.
Yeah, that thing's great. Yeah, hip hop family tree. That's a great comic.
Absolutely. No, I've had Ed, another Ed. I've had him on the show. Absolutely, man. But I love in Pulp, not only our main character, but again, the Pinkerton man that's after him and everything. And right now, forgive me, I'm forgetting their names. Is Gus our lead?
Yeah, Jeremiah Goldman. Yeah.
Oh, Jeremiah's the outlaw, and Gus
he's Pinkerton. No,
okay,
Max Winter's the outlaw.
Excuse me. All right, so Max and Jeremiah. Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Well, and again, you got two.
The Red Rock Kid.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's a great thing, man. No, two guys who've outlived, their primes, and how each of them are reacting to it and stuff, and that's really great. And also, it's great because it is so Western, given that one's the outlaw and one's the Pinkerton man, but it really does have that feel of a classic noir in terms of the former cop or the disgraced cop or whatever finding the outlaw and still not ready to close the book on him and stuff and tracking him down.
Yeah, it definitely. Well, I mean, westerns and samurai movies and noirs, like they're all tied together.
Sure.
Like Red Harvest is Yojimbo is
right.
$50. So they're all it's not that hard to juxtapose them. The interesting thing to me is like you look at something like Unforgiven, which is a movie that I probably saw like 50 times in theaters when it was out. I used to go see it every day at this $1 movie theater for like a matinee one in like the hottest summer of the decade in Seattle. But that is like still takes place in the Western era. And it's like these guys from, like the old, really bad, uncivilized days. But then if you read about the era that spawned like Billy the Kid and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and these various real life outlaws, like really it was all the land baron feuding and stuff. And these guys basically hiring mercenaries to go in and like burn people out of their property. And, that's why a lot of these guys ended up becoming outlaws was they lost everything. And so like that was happening in the 1880s, 1890s, that was not that, that was pretty close to civilization being a thing, and they were seizing stuff and just burning people out. And so when I thought about that, I was like, you do like an Unforgiven type of story about like the old age of an outlaw, but it's like the 1930s or the 1940s. Like, who is that person then? And like, what has changed in the world in their lifetime? When that was a much more interesting story. And then it was like, okay, so what is the like Unforgiven for like a Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid type of story?
Totally.
And the idea of like the Pinkerton who also didn't die, like hit me. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a lot of fun, actually. Like these two old men teaming up to rob the Nazis. Like, what a great idea.
It's a contract. Yeah, it's a.
If someone else had that idea, I'd be really mad I didn't come up with it.
Well, no, I hear it, and honestly, because truly the story is very different.
but
Yeah,
it
it sounds much
reminds
more
me.
commercial than the actual book itself is. The book itself is like this really quiet, sad meditation on the end of life. Like it's me processing my near-death experience.
No, I hope not. I mean, because I was going to say,
like, I mean, that's the main place that the book came from. I guess you didn't read. You don't have my newsletter because I put it out a couple weeks ago. I talked about that, like all the stuff about Max, like almost dying and worrying about what he's leaving his wife with when he goes. All that stuff was because, like, last year, in like April of last year, I got sucked out to sea in a riptide. And I'm going to try to just talk about it normally, but it was pretty terrifying. I was boogie boarding at a beach I go to like almost every day up to that point that summer. Or that year, it was spring. That was when we got the best waves. And I just like stepped off of a sandbar that I didn't realize, was like right in a riptide. And I didn't realize until I had tried to catch like 3 waves to go back in exactly what I had done. And I was already kind of exhausted and I just panicked. I just kept trying to swim against the riptide. And I was out there for about a half an hour. Luckily, I had the boogie board, but it was getting pretty sketchy. The waves were getting up to like 12 feet tall and kind of crashing over me, and I was getting sucked in. And I didn't realize too that I probably could have turned around and swam like another 5 feet the other direction and been right out of it. But that the idea of swimming further into the sea to get out of a riptide does not compute to your brain. You see people on the shore and you want to be with them. You don't want to go the other way.
Yeah.
But
oh my God, Ed. Holy shit.
Some water polo player guy who had lifeguard training at the beach, it's a beach with no lifeguard. And there were no surfers in the water, which I should have taken as a sign that it was maybe not a great day to go in by myself.
Sure. Yeah.
And basically this kid just ran down there, asked my wife if I was okay. She was on the phone with 911 and she said, no, he needs help. And he just like threw off his clothes. He had his bathing suit on and he just jumped into this like 50-degree water and nothing but a bathing suit. And he got to me, he jumped right into the riptide and got to me in about like 30 seconds probably. And up until that point, I'd been out there for about a half an hour and I was pretty sure I was like, oh, this is it.
Wow.
And so we managed to get back in. Luckily, I had the boogie board because when I saw him, I was like, oh my God, it's like he's not going to be able to save me. I'm going to kill him. Like this is the end for both of us. This is a terrible decision you made, kid.
Holy cow.
But, luckily, we managed to, because I had the boogie board, we managed to swim out of it. It was a really crazy one, and by the time we got to the beach, like the fire department and the police were there and everything. So it was a whole big thing. But yeah, after that, for a long time when I was writing like the last like probably half of Cruel Summer, like I was just barely sleeping because every time I would close my eyes, I would be like back out in the ocean. And it was like, oh, is my life just like some waking dream that I've been having? It was pretty much, it was a classic PTSD. And so when I sat down to start writing the book about this Western thing, and I knew that it was going to be a Western, I knew that it was going to be about Pulp Fiction, and I knew the thing about, I don't know if I had the idea about the Nazis yet, but I knew that it was going to be about an old outlaw who wrote stories about his adventures where he sort of changed the facts around to make him seem like more of a hero than he really was. And but when I started writing it, I was really thinking like in terms of, I almost died, and I would have, what would I have been leaving my wife with, and what was the world that I would have been leaving her in, like looking at the world around me. And it just really changed like everything in my life in a big way. Like I made a lot of big changes right after that. Like I cut out some toxic people that I'd been working with. Not just like personal stuff, but like I changed, my representation in Hollywood to, not because of the Writers Guild stuff, but just because I wanted to take better control of my own career. And, I just feel like I made a lot of just sort of personal changes, but it wasn't until I sat down to start writing this book that I realized like how just sort of mentally, traumatized I'd been by the whole thing, because when I was writing the book, like all of that came back again. So it was like, ugh.
Yeah.
Every night there were parts of writing that book where I was just like struggling to, get to the parts that were fun, because I was like, oh, okay, now I'm remembering all this again. I'm thinking about this every day again, every time I close my eyes. But once I was done with the book and Sean was drawing it and everything, it was like, like I made a joke. It's like, I feel like it was like some kind of Alan Moore magic spell where I like poured my PTSD into this book to share with everyone else.
Well, no, but I'm glad, you hear
two cowboys robbing the Nazis, but it's really like, about me.
Wow. Well, no, but I can hear, I mean, you hear that, obviously getting it out either in therapy or whatever is cathartic.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Clearly that's the case. And that's great,
yeah.
man. I'm glad. Jesus, no, Ed, I'm so sorry. I mean, because I do get your newsletter. And sometimes I'm like, I won't. Yeah, like an asshole. God, I miss that. I feel terrible that I missed that. Jesus.
It. I'm just kidding.
No, I know, man, but I do. I feel bad. And so, I'm really glad that.
Because I wrote about it. I hadn't really talked about it publicly, and I wrote about it because I just felt like I wanted people to understand that it was more than just two cowboys fighting the Nazis, that there was like something really personal about, there's something personal in every book that I write.
Sure.
Like
sure.
even, like the Gotham Central and Captain America's and things like that have things in them that are personal to me. But especially now that I'm just like 100% doing my own things, like often, whatever's happening to these characters is, no matter who they are, whether they're a girl or a guy or a little kid or an old man, it's like, you're always writing about yourself, as a writer. Like writers know that. Readers don't always know that. I think a lot of readers know that. I think we used to know that. I question what readers know about reading anymore, or how many people actually even read. Sometimes I feel like criticism of fiction lately. I don't know if it's written by people who actually read. not like literary criticism, but like people talking about like what fiction is, like on the internet and stuff. I feel like readers and writers sometimes have completely different ideas of what it's for.
I understand. Well, and also subtext is something that maybe gets lost on some critiques. I've noticed that in podcast criticism sometimes. That's not, critics that use podcasts to give their criticism, not criticism of podcasts, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah. So,
I want a podcast that's all about critiquing other people's podcasts. That would be amazing.
I don't know if I can handle it, and I'll be honest.
My podcast where we listen to your podcast and criticize it because you're that would be really funny. Let's not veer off that tangent.
No, absolutely.
Too, like one of the things that I love about not being on social media is that I don't give a lot of my mental space to that side of the world, because even when I was part of it, I always thought it was like we're looking at a splinter of reality and acting like everybody is part of it. And it's like a lot of people aren't participating in social media, and they're not part of that. And I was even just talking to my wife about this today. I realized like even the news that I consume, that I feel like I've found like I trust these news sources. I know that a big part of their job is to try to keep me engaged in clicking stories. And part of their job to do that is to keep making me outraged over and over again.
100%, Ed.
I'm just glad like my wife and I, neither of us ever were like Facebook people.
I understand that. Well, back to Pulp, because with Max, there are shades of Hollis Mason from Watchmen, missing the old days, and Under the Hood, and also the way he goes out before his last moments with the Knothead Gang, but also in contrast to Pulp, Brian Azzarello covered that same late Western period into the modern age with Loveless, but that guy was in jail, and when I love that turn at the end when he comes out of jail And, the world has modernized while he was in the lockup, and he really doesn't know how to function anymore. And that's why Max and Jeremiah are so interesting, because they have seen the world change.
Yeah, it's always something I remember, just, and I thought about that with Max, just thinking in terms of the amount of change you would see in your life, but also the idea of like being an outlaw who escapes to Mexico, like what his views on the world in the 30s might be compared to other people, as like a guy who spent 20 years living in a foreign country speaking in another language, and
connecting with his maiden all and everything, I thought was a kind of a nice bittersweet romance that's in the middle of the story as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the whole point of the book in a lot of ways, is like he's trying to, it's less about his legacy and more about like taking care of, the people in your life that you care about. Like, what are you leaving for them? What are they going to do when you're gone? And that's like something, the older you get, the more you think about, sadly.
Well, and also, again, that great pulp trope of the hero and the villain. Well, at least initially the villain, but then they become kind of partners. That he feels, as he says in his own thoughts, that, wow, it's weird how, one of your enemies, you become as close as friends.
And exactly. Like the hunter and the hunted have more in common. Once the hunt is over, they have a lot more in common than the rest of the world around them.
Yep. Whereas go ahead.
Both of them have interesting views on the world in some ways, because even though they're from a different period of time, they've both been dealing with, in different ways, fascism and racism for their whole lives, because, definitely Max as a young, like rancher was a victim of, the sort of fascist land grab of the big businessmen, which is like approved by the government, which is, pretty much the definition of fascism.
Totally. Yeah, you're right. But here in America, we call it progress. So,
exactly. Manifest destiny.
Absolutely. Have you ever seen, there's a great Western, it's a throwaway Western, but I like it. And it almost covers the same territory, but it stays in the 1800s. It was Robert Mitchum and George Kennedy, The Good Guys and the Bad Guys.
Oh, no, I've never seen that. I was thinking a lot about like Ride the High Country, that kind of
sure.
That line where he's like, all I want is to walk into my house justified. Like that's something as a kid you don't understand, and as an adult like makes so much sense to you after like a lifetime of like being like, I've been married for 20 years now. Like so much of my life is different than even at the start of my career, like 25, 30 years ago.
I understand. Well, and also the Westerns, I do think, and it's so funny because now, and I'm sure you experience this in your own family, I think when we're kids and we see the kid Westerns, and they do look so similar to the Anthony Mann films or the Bud Boetticher films that are more complex and more psychological, that as we get older, we gravitate to those movies. And like you say, they are really about the human condition and not just shoot 'em ups and everything. And suddenly it's like, wow, this thing that looked like no different than an episode of The Lone Ranger or The Sister Kid suddenly has this gravitas that you're not expecting. Because, man, I am rediscovering so many Westerns that I blew off as a kid because, I'm not interested in that. And now it's like, oh, I had no idea this was going on. And now I really have this great affection for the Jimmy Stewart, Anthony Mann movies. And like I said, Bud Boetticher is a classic example. And there's just these Randolph Scott movies that every now and then it's like, wow, something bigger is going on here than I realized. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm not like a huge, I think I watched some Westerns as a kid with my dad, but I was never like a big Western fan. And in fact, like I've probably read a few like Elmore Leonard Western stories, but like even during the 70s, during that big Louis L'Amour craze, I remember my brother and my dad both reading a ton of Louis L'Amour books, and I just did not care. Like, it was a weird thing for me. It wasn't until like discovering the spaghetti Westerns where I was like, oh, give me this, like this crazy over the top, like hyper violent,
sure.
The noir version, I guess, basically but it's like that weird kind of hyperactive, insane fantasy version of the West.
Yes.
It's as different to what really happened as Bonanza,
Yeah. It's funny, again, another show that now I will watch Bonanzas and stuff. And actually, I just watched, I forget the guy's name, the showrunner that was the main script guy and stuff. And he's got some fascinating interviews about how he wrote that show.
It's really interesting to read about that era of TV, like the 60s and 70s, before they had like the standard full writer's room and anything. Like that was what I was curious about Rockford too, was like, how did they actually do it?
Yep.
A lot of those scripts have different writers' names on them. And basically what they would do is they would like assign someone a script, like a freelance writer, and that person would write a couple drafts of it. And then one of the producers would rewrite the script to sort of make it feel more like,
yep.
So they would sort of make the characters consistent, because they would know like, oh, Rockford wouldn't say that, or his dad, wouldn't shoot a gun, or whatever.
And it was like you said, it was young David Chase, but working with Stephen Cannell, and I loved how in the 90s when they would do Rockford movies, and it's right before The Sopranos, David Chase came back.
Yeah, he wrote. The thing he did right before The Sopranos was like a 2-hour like Rockford thing where he goes to Jersey and gets involved in the mob, I think. And it was for CBS, who originally commissioned The Sopranos like right after that. So, but he wasn't that young. I mean, he was 30. I guess that's young for like a Hollywood career, but he'd been on, I think he'd been a writer on like Kolchak the Night Stalker.
That's right. Absolutely. He was. I get to meet him. Premiere of the second season of The Sopranos, HBO did this big outreach to FM radio and sports radio, and it was a combination of, you got to see the premiere of The Sopranos, meet the cast, meet David Chase, and then go to a Roy Jones fight. And I was covering boxing, so they sent me out, and we were in Little Italy eating, and I got to meet David Chase, and absolutely, I asked him about Rockford and the Night Stalker, and it was terrific, and he really lit up, and he's like, oh, that's great that I did that. I'm like, absolutely, man. So yeah, it was really one of my favorite experiences in sports radio, was getting to meet David Chase and certainly even the cast of The Sopranos. But yeah, I was a big fan, so it was great to meet him and stuff. And yeah, it wasn't much, but we talked for about 10 minutes about it back and forth, and he was very kind. It was pretty cool. I was very pleased.
Yeah, I'd love to like meet him someday and just talk to him about Rockford.
Yeah.
Just don't even ask him about The Sopranos. He would probably find that so refreshing, I hope. But like I've been watching so much Rockford lately, I had to stop myself from just like having a background. I'm like, sometimes I'm like doing something else and it's just like comfort music in the background or something. I'm like, all right, like put Belle and Sebastian back on and
sure.
Don't let this beautiful TV show be background noise. But yeah, I'm like watching a couple episodes every day and just kind of watching it through from the beginning over again. And I feel like such a weird fanboy for it, because I loved it as a kid, and I like as an adult, I'm now finding it to be like so well done. Like it's just shocking to me that of things of that era, a lot of them like hold up enough that I can watch them, but there's a lot of creaky shit in it,
Oh, sure.
Like I've been reading the Travis McGee books for the first time.
Now that I saw you mention in your newsletter.
Partly I've been reading them. Like they were my dad's favorites as a kid, and I was more of a Ross McDonald than a John D. McDonald reader.
Understood.
And there was a feud between them, I think, and so I kind of was like such a Ross McDonald fan that I avoided the Travis McGee books a little bit. Plus, he wasn't a real detective; he was like a repo man or
he had his boat.
Yeah, he had his boat. He seemed more like a criminal in some ways when I was reading all my detective stuff. And I remember trying one and not being grabbed by it and just like being like, all right, I guess this just isn't for me. And then when I started working on Reckless, I was mentioning it to a friend who mentioned Travis McGee, and I'm like, oh, I should go read some of those to make sure that I'm not like just stepping all over it in the most obvious ways, because he is the most famous series detective character from the 20th century. He's like the Batman of series characters. Like Jack Reacher wouldn't exist if not for Travis McGee.
I'm nodding. Yes.
And I hadn't ever read any of them. so I did a very like comic collector thing, and I bought the entire fucking series.
I was gonna say definitely over 20 books. How many books was it?
Like a comic book, you know, I remember when I got the job for Captain America, I spent so many hours and so many dollars on eBay buying like every run of Captain America that I hadn't read, like, and rebuying all like as much as I could afford, like the cheapest, you know, most trashed copies. But I bought like probably like 400 issues of Captain America to reread before I started working on the book.
Wow.
Yeah, I made it to about Capwolf before I gave up. But so I started reading these Travis McGee books, and I was like I've had authors who I love, like some of my favorite authors tell me these are among their favorite books and that they still reread them. And like, they're well written. The stories are good. The plots are overall good. The character's really interesting in that he is like way ahead of the curve on being an environmentalist. And he is like way ahead of the curve on a lot of social like commentary stuff. And yet they are some of the most sexist books I've ever read in my life. They are like, they're not like as upfront sexist as like Bond books from the 50s are.
I'm with you.
Know? Where like, you know, where James Bond talks about liking sex with a hint of rape in it or something like really creepy, or just being super racist. Like, I don't feel like the books I've read in this series so far, and I probably won't end up reading the whole series. I'm curious to see how the character changes over like the 25 years that he wrote the books.
Right. Yeah.
And to see if his ways that he interacts with, you know, women ever improve. But what's weird is like, he's just so ahead of the curve on a lot of things. And in fact, the fourth book, I would argue, is where the plot line, the big twist for Chinatown is basically stolen from like the fourth or third Travis McGee book. Has that exact same twist about a rich guy who has a daughter illegally, or just like there's like a really twisted story, but it actually has an additional twist onto it, which adds a whole racial angle to it. So it's like really ahead of its time for 1963. And yet at the same time, every interaction that Travis McGee, the character, has with women is somehow sexualized. Like, he literally doesn't want to take a case because he doesn't find the woman like attractive. And she's kind of bitchy. So he's like, You know? And it's like, and every single woman in the books I've read so far, like any woman that he comes into contact with immediately like falls in love with him. And it's just like, it's weird to see someone who had such a blind spot. And then I thought, well, he started writing these books in like 1962. It was a completely different world. Like maybe like that was just expected for like a serious detective character to just like every woman he meets like falls into bed with him. I haven't read that many other books from that era, but it was really jarring to me. And I was just like, you know, and looking back at Rockford now, you know, which is where the tangent started.
Sure.
Rockford holds up. Like Rockford doesn't, you don't cringe at Rockford as much about stuff like that. Yeah, every now and then, like there's a moment that feels very 1970s, but it's not. He doesn't like hit on all of his like potential clients. He doesn't like go barging into fights. Like I love the fact that he like tries to weasel out of fights and is constantly like sucker punching people and running.
Yeah.
Like he's fairly close to what a real detective, you know, might have been in that era, other than that, you know, most of these cases no detective would ever really take.
Well, no, you're right. And, you know, a different kind of cringy book that falls into that same trap, and certainly not as, because John MacDonald was certainly considered, I think, literary in the same way that Chandler was. You know, but
I think so. Yeah, I mean, he wrote books that got made into movies. The Travis McGee books, as hugely successful as they are, never really had any successful movies made from them. And even recently, they failed to get a movie made with Bale and Leonardo DiCaprio at one point. Like they've tried over and over again. But you know, Cape Fear is based on one of his books, and they made that into a hugely successful movie.
I didn't know that. That's amazing. But I was thinking of the Destroyer series.
Yeah.
That, I mean, and again, there's a lot of things that aren't very sensitive by today's standards in them. And absolutely one of the things are that immediately women fall for him and they wind up, I mean, they're always interludes. They're always ... They never get graphic.
Oh, yeah. The Mac Bolan. Yeah. Like all of those. Yeah. I get the sense if you're a paperback hero, that's supposed to be the thing. One of the things I'm trying to rectify with Reckless is to, to make a character that the books aren't just filled with rampant sexism. At least I hope.
Understood. Well, and I mean, that's still about 15 years post Executioner and Destroyer and everything as far as those men's books. Again, I grew up, the generation behind that. So seeing those on the racks always appealed to me. And then, you'd get those great covers by, and now I'm blanking, some of the great pulp, paperback cover artists.
Yeah.
Like Robert McGinnis, people like that.
Yeah. Or like even the really cheesy ones that you would see at like the drugstore where where they would have like a whole like bookcase filled with just like, volumes, book 36 and the, whatever. Don Pendleton's whatever. And I remember just looking at the covers the covers were so much better than the books whenever you would buy the books, which were only like 45 cents or 75 cents or something. I remember buying like 3 or 4 of them once when I convinced my dad at the Fed Mart to like give me a couple $dollars to buy books. He was so excited I was buying books instead of comics, I think. And then I got them home and I probably got like 10 pages into the first book and I was like, this isn't very well written. But the covers were so cool because they were these like very exciting montage covers. And I bugged Sean. I sent Sean like all these different book covers from the like 60s and 70s that I loved when we were working on the covers for Reckless. And there's another cover Sean did initially that I don't think anyone's seen yet that we may use for something else down the line, like a paperback reprint or something. But the cover that got released was actually finished after Sean had drawn like half the book. So he actually knew like so much more about the book and the characters and all that stuff that I didn't have to give him any cover concepts. I just was like, do it like one of those cool old 70s paperback, 60s, 70s paperbacks with a montage cover that has this sort of seedy, old musty paperback, quality to it. And that was all I had to ask him for. And he sent over a sketch, and the first sketch was the exact thing that we ended up using, for the book cover. And it's just like, I think it's the best cover Sean's ever done in our whole like 20-year career. Because the painting quality of it is just so good, and the montage itself is just perfect. But it also just really captures the flavor of what the book is, and that sort of nostalgia that the book is sort of riffing off of,
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's why I'm excited, based on what I've seen, really starting with, My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies. The work that Sean and Jacob coloring has really, has only progressed in the best ways. And that's why Pulp is beautiful, man. So I'm excited to see what you're describing here in Reckless. So
yeah, it's really fun watching Jake just kind of get more interesting and more accomplished with every project. Like I thought Junkies, honestly, and I had several colorists in comics to like come up to me and tell me that they thought it was like the best debut of a colorist, in just decades, because usually when somebody's first job as a colorist, they're doing a fairly safe thing. Whereas, Jake's first job as a colorist, like just was like all about exploding the page and coloring outside the lines and doing something that really was dynamic and bold. And people don't really just debut like that. Like, I really feel like he should have gotten nominated for like a best newcomer just for his coloring. And he's got several comics coming out now. And
I know.
Point where I'm like, Sean, make sure he can't quit.
Yeah, really. No, I heard
our work is more important than his. Damn it.
I heard the guy that he's writing with on Dana Gould, like either one or two podcasts ago. Dana had the writer on, and he was talking about. He's like, "Oh, I'm working with this artist, Jacob Phillips. You might know his dad, Sean, works with Ed Brubaker." I'm like, I know exactly what you're talking about. That's amazing. So yeah, I'm really excited to see Jacob's book and then get to see his full art and everything. That's terrific.
Yeah, he's great, and it's just been fun to watch his progress. Like each book, he colors a little bit differently, and like I actually before he started coloring Reckless, I sent him just like a bunch of different photos that to me feel like, you know, Southern California in like the 70s and 80s, like, or just California. Like I really wanted the book to have that this, because people from other places who didn't live here during that era, like a lot of people just think of Southern California as like just dry and brown. And it is in a lot of places now, especially with like the incessant droughts that they get down there.
Yeah.
But it was a lot greener, like when I was younger, but like in my mind, I always think of like blues and yellows, and you know, like just beautiful sunset. Like, so I just had to put together a lot of imagery for him because I was like, here's what I think of when I think of California. Like I think of like, you know, like Terrence Malick movies or even like Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, like that kind of washed out.
Gotcha.
Look, like, you know, very arty look to, you know, what the palette is, and all the work he's done on this new book. I mean, you saw those first 4 pages, and you know that's nothing. Like the stuff he's done, it's just amazing. It's like by far the best work, and I think Sean is doing the best work of his whole career, which is crazy because he's been doing comics for like 40 something years.
Wow.
He started publishing professionally at like 13, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
God damn, I was going to say like 25 or 30. That's amazing.
Oh, no. He started doing comics when he was in like high school or whatever they call it in England.
Sure.
He was drawing like girls comics in like the early 80s.
Oh, wow.
Jesus. Yeah, for those like British magazines that are like where they had like specific markets they were aimed at.
This episode of Word Balloon is brought to you by Curiosity Stream. Curiosity Stream is a streaming service that has thousands of documentaries and nonfiction TV shows on topics like history, nature, science, food, technology, travel, and more. They even have exclusive programs featuring hosts like David Attenborough, Stephen Hawking, Nick Offerman, and Chris Hadfield. Just use the promo code WORDBALLOON, WORDBALLOON, to sign up for just $14.99 for the whole year. I'm watching amazing shows like Return to the Moon, Space Junk Dangers, Birth of the Internet, and Cold War Hot Jets. Subscribe today. You won't believe the selection of programs Curiosity Stream has to offer. You can easily stream everything on Curiosity Stream from your TV, phone, tablet, or computer. Learn something today and be entertained in the process. Don't forget, use the promo code WORDBALLOON to sign up for just $14.99 for the whole year. Curiosity Stream. Smart TV for your smart TV.
What else? Because I know you want to hold off, and we'll get into Reckless when it's closer to its release. But I appreciate the ambition of what you guys want to do. You're going to release them as full graphic novels as opposed to chapters. So yeah, talk about that. You know, again, is that reading the market basically? I mean, you know.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is like, you know, it really is specific to us. Like, I think there are teams in comics who can do what we do. Like, I think, you know, Tom King and Mitch Gerads, like,
yes,
those guys are going from project to project at DC. They could easily take that to like Image or some other publisher and just do their own things and, you know, and keep themselves busy for, you know, 20 years doing that. I'm sure a huge chunk of their audience would follow them. But for us, what I've been discovering over the last several years is, you know, my own desire to do longer things, sort of that's been building up for me, but also like, I guess we finished Kill or Be Killed, like, I want to say like 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, right before we did Junkies. And Kill or Be Killed was like 20 issues, I think. So we were working on it for about 2 years straight. And I felt like when we finished it, like it felt like this huge achievement to me, and it was probably our best selling thing while it was coming out. It was like I think sales consistently would go up now and then like it leveled off and never just continued to go down, which most books do. Like the last 10 issues of it, I think, sold within a dozen copies of each other every month. So we had this really hardcore fan base, and like after the first issue launched, we never got any press for the book at all. And when the trade paperback collections would come out, we never got any like real coverage. Like some places would review here or there, but the time when we actually were putting out a book that could reach out to a wider audience, like was not the window when people were talking about the book anymore. When in the comics market, the way the current comics market, well, let's see what the current comics market is in a month. But, in the market that we've been in for, my whole life, the most time that people talk about a book is when that book is announced. And then when the first one is actually released, you'll get like a big bump of people talking about it. But generally when a project is announced, like probably if you look at like, what is Tom King doing now? The Adam Strange,
right? Strange Adventures, yeah.
So like when that got announced at like Comic-Con last year or whatever, like if you looked at how much press that got compared to how much press it got when the first issue actually came out, I would guess it probably got about 5 times or 10 times as much press around the announcement as around when it was actually released. So imagine how little press it's going to get when its 12-issue collection comes out compared to how much it got around the time it was released. It's just it's for people who are doing like evergreen model stuff where you intend the books to stay in print and not be just, because a trade paperback of most comics published by Marvel and DC is basically the equivalent of reading 4 or 5 issues of Batman or Ant-Man or whatever it is. It's not something that you're going to want to save forever and go back to and read over and over again. Like
I'm with you.
It's, and the quality of the material that they're publishing, I'm not talking about creative wise, like I don't read enough of Marvel and DC's work to judge the creative talent at their companies at all. I have nothing against them. It's just I'm not that interested in superheroes anymore. But if you just look at the packaging, this is what I'm talking about. Like the package that they put out in a trade paperback, like a Marvel trade paperback looks about as thick as 2 Marvel comic books. It's printed on some kind of tissue paper, and it's $20-something. Sometimes I bought like something through Amazon. I wanted to read some collection that was like 12 issues. Can't remember what it was. And when I got it, I was just like, God, I don't want this on my bookshelf. Like this looks terrible. It's a terrible package. Like I feel like, and it was like $30 or something. And it looked like it was about as thick as like a 4-issue trade from 10 years ago, and I was just like, they're just churning this stuff out. They're not thinking of it as like, something for the bookshelf, like when they put out like a deluxe hardcover of Marvels,
Right. Yep.
So the market's in a really weird place, just objectively speaking, because it's divided up a lot between like people who buy single issues and people who buy trades and paper and hardbacks, or people who want like the deluxe oversized coffee table edition version. And what I discovered with the releases of Junkies and Bad Weekend, which has then been borne out by Pulp, though I made the decision on Reckless like before Pulp was actually released. But if anything, it's proven that I was right, is like our putting out single issues of our stuff, because of who Sean and I are and the career that we've had for, nearly 20 years now of like building a readership, the readers that we have that have stayed with us the whole time, basically like, they either buy our single issues or they buy our hardbacks, as far as I can tell. And when we release a hardback that there hasn't been single issues of, they buy that. Like the ones who don't usually buy like the trade paperback or the hardback because they already read the single issue comic, they still want like the hardback. And then when they buy that hardback, then they end up going and finding more of our books because they're like, oh, this hardback is incredibly nice, because we spend a ton of money on production. We always have the best paper. We always have, end papers in our books, which is a lot more expensive. Like, people don't realize how much it costs to print some of these books, like the unit cost. But like, I want these books to exist and be beautiful objects. So like, we put a lot into them. And what I found kind of was we were bifurcating our audience between all these different formats that we were releasing. And on top of that, it was press-wise, it's so hard to get coverage for a book that you're doing at all. You work in journalism about pop culture. Like, it's very hard. The longer that you're around, like a team like Sean and I, the longer that we're around, like, you can get waves where people like suddenly are like, hey, these guys have been around for a long time, and you'll get some publicity for just your longevity. But it becomes harder and harder to get coverage. Of what you do the longer that you're around. Like, people are interested in like whatever's the new cool thing.
Absolutely, Ed.
So like us doing a graphic novel for Junkies, like, I got a lot more attention for Junkies than I got for Kill or Be Killed, which was arguably a much more commercial project. But Junkies ended up selling better and being a much bigger deal because it was us doing an original graphic novel. It was us doing something out of the box and like a left turn that people weren't expecting. And so that got people's attention. It's like, if the guy from Flaming Lips decides to make a movie, he gets more publicity. 20 movies later, nobody cares.
Right. Rob Zombie. Rob Zombie was making films. So, absolutely, man.
Yeah. It's like everything always ends up being about the quality of whatever you're doing, no matter what. Like, you can't.
Sure.
Like, but so just looking at it, just on a sheer, like, what makes sense publishing wise and maintaining our catalog, like we were dividing up our audience a lot. But then, like, organically, what happened was, like, I was exactly 100% the opposite direction. When we were doing Criminal last year and we were doing Cruel Summer, like, I was really loving creatively everything that we were doing. And, we don't stick to like a standard page count. We never did like 20 or 22 pages an issue. We were always 24 to 34 to 38 pages, depending on what we need and how much time Sean has to draw.
Yeah, so I'm nodding. Yeah.
We didn't stick to the standard thing, but there's a weird thing that happens in comics, which is like, no matter how successful you become after your early projects, when you go back to your early projects, people don't care as much. like just looking at Incognito, Fatale, The Fade Out, Kill or Be Killed, each one of those sold exponentially better than the one that came before it, and all of them sold better than Criminal, like on just monthly single issues. Like,
wow,
the numbers that those books reached were always 25, 30, sometimes 50% more than an issue of Criminal would sell. So I assumed when we came off of Kill or Be Killed, which was our biggest selling, like, the trades were doing really well, the single issues were like the most stable for probably the whole indie comics market, outselling, a lot of our like monthly singles at least. And we were making good money on the monthlies, actually, beyond, what we were used to. And I just thought, okay, finally we've hit this point where, because every project we'd done up until that point, since we'd gotten to Image, had been like, we're going up. And even to the point where like Kill or Be Killed and Fatale at different points around issue 5 or 6, orders went up instead of down. And because people realized like, oh, okay, we're selling more of this, or we can sell more of this. And so like, clearly we were making an impression on retailers, and they were having hardcore like Brubaker Phillips like buyers in their stores.
Yeah.
That were following us from like everything we'd spent, a decade and a half building, I thought was totally paying off. So now is the time to do Criminal again, and we're going to get like way more people to read it than ever did before. And we went back to it, and it basically sold exactly what it did at Icon.
Wow.
Like, the launch was almost number for number the same, like 15 years later, like when it was much easier for us to sell anything we did. Like, you know, it was just so disheartening in a way, because I thought we were doing our best work. And I talked to several friends, and they said a lot of retailers, no matter what, how much they love your work, if you're going back to a title you've used before, like if Walking Dead were to come back in 5 years, a lot of retailers that were ordering it before, who are still around in 5 years, will look at whatever they sold on the last issue of Walking Dead and add like a certain percentage for the new number one, you know, and that'll be
sure.
And then they'll just go back to whatever they sold on it before, is what they'll assume. And for a lot of them, that might be correct. And the other thing is, what I learned was I sold more of Junkies than I sold of issue 1 of Criminal.
Wow.
And issue 1 of Criminal cost like $4 and was 40 pages.
Right.
Like, so, but people were more excited about Junkies, and which was Criminal, you know, but it just,
of course,
called My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies. And on the title page, you found out it was connected to Criminal. And I just thought, okay, like, I feel like what we tried to do with Criminal originally was correct. The way that we were releasing Criminal before, with each book was its own book and no numbers on the spine and all that stuff. I feel like in a lot of ways we made the right decisions. It's just we were ahead of the market. Like, the market now it's easier for us to put out Bad Weekend and not call it Criminal Volume whatever Bad Weekend. It's just to put out a hardback called Bad Weekend that on the title page says a criminal novella.
Right.
Or Junkies, which is an original thing, which excites people even more, because this is the only way you can buy it. You know, it's
sure.
This book. And, you know, so like, I feel like the market has sort of morphed towards us. But so in my frustration while working on Criminal, I was talking to like several friends, and just, you know, it's like, no matter how successful you get, like when you're working on the thing that you're the most proud of and it's not getting like whatever kind of responses you hoped it would get, like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you're a multimillionaire, or if you're Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or whatever, like, it gets you down. Like, it just does.
Yeah.
Like, and it definitely, like, there were moments where I was just like, I don't get it. I feel like we're doing the best version of Criminal that we've ever done, you know, that's at least as good as what Kill or Be Killed was doing. And, you know, I feel like I went extra. This sounds so whiny, by the way.
No, I go on.
You know, like, I always have loved single issue comics, and I, from the beginning of Criminal, have worked hard to add extra content whenever we do issues, because I want to recreate that feeling for our readers, where they like are excited when they see a new issue and they know there's going to be extra stuff. And, you know, like, I love that about single issue comics. So, like, I really felt like, okay, this is just a failing of mine. Like, this isn't anything about the market. This isn't anything about, you know, people just don't, you know, want to buy this kind of thing. And so I in my, like, you know, I probably like 3 or 4 issues before we were done with Criminal, when I was figuring out what we were going to do next, I had an idea for something that, you know, I thought was a good idea that would probably be like a bigger hit than anything we'd done up until that point, maybe. And that was sort of taking what we do and adding it to like a really weird sort of Cold War espionage thing, but then also adding in some elements of the supernatural and like fairy tales to it. And it was, you know, it was going to end up being something probably that would have felt, you know, I don't even, it's hard to describe, because I may end up doing something with it someday. It was an idea that I was kind of attracted to, just you know, and it filled up a whole notebook. And then when I sat down to start working on it, like, the pandemic had hit, and the comic market had completely shut down.
Right, absolutely.
Sean, like in the first part of the year this year was me and Sean making Junkies for, up until the end of March when it was going to print. And then the day that it was going to print, the whole economy shut down, including the printer and the distributor. And so I was like, all right, well, I'll just get a jump on this new series. And I was like leaning hard into the opposite direction of where I feel like I am now mentally. Like I was like, all right, I'm really going to try and create something that's just aimed at the direct market comic book retailers. I want to give them, like whatever Criminal wasn't doing for them, as much as I felt like, all right, this is one of the best comics we've ever done. And it's a great package worth everybody's money. And, I always forget that like most comic book stores just don't really sell a lot of crime comics and certainly not ones that are about the bad guys,
Right. Yeah.
So I was just like completely in the headspace of like, okay, well, there are comics that are successful, that are doing better than ours. And I wasn't looking at what we'd already done that was successful. At that moment, I was like, all right, I still want to do monthly comics. Like I love, just writing an issue of a comic and getting pages from Sean and having it come out a month later. Like I love that whole process. I've spent 20 years doing that almost nonstop. I couldn't imagine a world where that wasn't what we were doing. And yet here I am about to start issue 1 on a comic and the entire comics market is shut down.
Right.
And then I looked at the comic I was going to write. And because of everything going on in the world right at that moment with the pandemic and just, you just got the sense it was not going to be good. Like everything that was happening, things just felt like they were escalating, like in various parts of the world. It just felt like this is going to be a rough year, even before we were in like hardcore pandemic mode.
Yep.
Now.
Yes.
And I looked at this thing I was going to write and I suddenly lost like all desire to write it. And I just was like, it's not going to be any fun. Like even if it came out good, I'm not going to have any fun writing it. And I looked at what I was reading and what I was watching TV and movies, and I was like, sort of being drawn to, obviously escapism because we're all in lockdown in this world that feels completely uncertain and scary at times. And so I looked around at that and I just thought, okay, I've got to get Sean working on something. And I just suddenly like saw those Darwin Cook Parker books on the shelf because I'd been working on the second Martini edition. Like we did an additional story for that.
We talked about that. Absolutely.
I reread all those books and when I was rereading them, like, early or like late last year, I remembered thinking, man, this is such a wasted opportunity that no one else ever tried to do anything like this with these, like what Darwin did with these books. And even though they're, the Parker books are adapted from novels, like they're just so cool to get this graphic novel that tells a complete story about this character. And then you go on to the next book and it's like years later and it's a totally, self-contained story. And I just thought, this is something we see, in bookstores and in book franchises constantly from the beginning of, series characters up until today. It's like a hugely popular thing that never really has been done in comics outside of Darwin doing those Parker books. And I just thought, like, hey, we should do something like that, but like a completely original version of, that kind of paperback hero. Like, what's our take on that? And that seemed like something that would actually be fun to do. So it just kind of became organic from the shutdown of just like, well, what can we work on? That, worst comes to worse if the comics market doesn't come back and the publishers, if the distributor doesn't reopen and the stores all shut down, we'll have basically by the end of the year, we'll have, a complete graphic novel that we can either try to sell to another publisher or we can kickstart or if the comics market was back, then we could just, publish it through Image, through the comics market and bookstore, like, which is what's happening, thank God. But it was mostly just like, we need to keep moving forward. What are we doing? And then because of, the pandemic and the shutdown, I was able to take a step back for a second and breathe and just think, okay, well, what are we doing, and what do I want to do, and what's something that we can do that will be really exciting and different than what anyone's doing in the market, actually. And that was when I was like, oh, this Reckless thing. Like Reckless, is like something that I've had sitting in my notebooks for almost 10 years, like the actual story of the first book.
Okay.
The character is something I came up with, 10 years ago at least, and was just something I didn't know what I was ever going to do with it, because it didn't totally fit into everything else Sean and I did, and I wasn't even sure. I think when I originally came up with it, I thought it might be like a mystery novel that I wrote. And then I started thinking more and more it would be fun to see it as a comic, because it would be fun to see Sean draw this period piece. And this was long before we actually did any like real period piece stuff like the Fade Out and Pulp.
Okay.
And so this was just something, sort of an idea that I'd been kicking around in notebooks and in the back of my head for years about a series character. And then it just was like, let's do that. Like, that'll be fun. And, and I was noticing, I looked at how much material we actually put out regularly. And one of the things that I noticed about Pulp was I was very stressed out during the last half of writing it, because I was so concerned that I couldn't go beyond a certain page count, or Sean, or we would have to go up another signature, and Sean might not be able to finish, or Jake, might not be able to get the colors done in time to hit our print deadline, because hardbacks take longer to print than
right. Yep.
So I remember, that feeling, and like while I was writing both Pulp and Junkies, I remember just thinking, I wish I didn't have to worry about how many pages these were. I wish they could just be longer. With Pulp, like I think we fit everything that needed to be in both of those books into them, but I would have happily had like 10 more pages with those characters, just as a personal,
sure,
just for my own indulgence, maybe. I don't know if it would have made it better or worse, but like, so for this, I was just looking at it and I just thought, well, hell, we could do, what is the equivalent of like 5 or 6 Marvel or DC comics into one book. And Sean can, we can do that in, 5 months, 6 months time, maybe. Like, and we had this lead time. And so I just thought, all right, well, let's try to do a book that's, roughly around the same length as those early Parker books were. 120, 130, 140 pages, something like that. And so the first one has ended up being like a 144 page book. But really, it was just like, what is exciting to me about it was like, we can do something that's like, it's a series thing, but I don't have to think in terms of like, when does this issue end? Where do I need to break this story? Do I need a cliffhanger here? Do I need an end beat there that feels satisfying? Like, I can just write it through as one straight story. I've been writing much faster, actually, because of that. And Sean's been drawing faster because he doesn't have to take a break every 4 weeks to take 3 or 4 days to work on covers and cover paintings and cover sketches. Like, he's able to just kind of keep moving forward. And it just really feels like a natural progression for what we're doing, which is trying to create complete graphic novels. And for as an example of, so we can talk about Cruel Summer for a couple minutes before.
Please. I hope so.
Move on. But like, for an example of like why this makes sense for us is like, Cruel Summer is probably the most complex thing we've done, certainly since the Fade Out, if not more complex and ambitious. And, it was really hard. It was a story I probably was thinking about for about 15 years before I started writing it. And when I cracked the nature of how to tell that story, of going from, letting each character sort of have their own storyline and have them all wrap around each other until they, head towards that collision. Like, just on the level of ambition, it's twice as long as anything else we've ever done in Criminal. And, the scope of the story was something bigger than anything I'd ever attempted before. It's this multi-generational sort of, attempt at like a crime epic in comic book form. And like, imagine if that was coming out now as an original graphic novel that you hadn't already read the single issues of. Like, nobody talked about Cruel Summer when it was coming out in the single issues because it started in issue 5 of a 12-issue run of a comic book. People don't care what starts in issue 5. People talk about issue 1. They maybe talk about issue 2 and 3. After that, they really don't care unless you are like Brian Vaughan and you put like an ejaculating penis on page 1. You can get some press. Like, it's really hard to get readers' attentions, and so we have this book coming out, which is probably the thing I'm most proud of in my entire career up to this point. And it is much harder to get reviews. It's harder to get coverage. It's harder to get the book treated as a graphic novel, which like, the book is kind of remastered. I rewrote little bits and pieces of it here and there. The last page of the prologue is, a little bit different than it was when it was in the comic.
Oh, wow. Okay. So really it started with that first issue of Criminal. Then you went on to Bad Weekend. And then came back to it in issue 5 too, right?
Issue 1 of Criminal, like, I realized by the time I was done with it that it was going to be like a prologue to the bigger story that would start in issue 5, which I was calling The Summer of '88, which my wife pointed out sounds like a bad surfing movie, bad coming of age surf movie. But so, like, I mean, thank God, that we had the Criminal comic, because I needed to get that story out. I needed to write about all that childhood stuff, and I needed to tell this epic story of the last days of Teague Lawless. Like, I really wanted to do that. And us putting it out in the single issues of the comic allowed me the chance to do it on a much bigger scale. Like, I don't think a year ago it would have even occurred to me to try to do, 150 or a 200 or a 250 page graphic novel. Even now, that page count is daunting to me because I don't like the idea of being off the rack for that long. Even that would take Sean like most of a year to draw at this point if we did a 250 page original.
Sure.
The other side of that coin is, at the end of that year, when that book was coming out, we would be getting a lot of notice for, this big, ambitious, multi-generational crime epic thing that we spent a year of our lives working on. And so it's a really interesting thing. I feel like basically I was looking at the market and not seeing it at all. Like, I was looking at what our readers actually wanted from us and thinking, no, I need to give them this other thing that they are clearly not really that into. So it was like it was really just as clear as like seeing what was actually selling for us. And, and also like knowing that if we did this series of books this way, where they're all like, 120, 130 pages, like, for a pulp character, like a series character that's like a, part repo man, part private detective, troublemaker kind of character, these kind of short, sharp pulp graphic novels, that format is so perfect. And Darwin really proved that by adapting the Parker books into graphic novels.
True.
So having that as like okay, well, no one's done that since then, and no one's tried to do it as an original thing in America. So let's try and do that. And that allows me to look at our productivity and schedule these things out and go, oh my God, we can put 3 of these out in 1 year. So it still gives our readership the sense of like, oh, the next one is coming and the next one is coming. But there's no cliffhanger. There's no to be continued. It's like you get a complete book, and then the next book, comes out 4 months later, and you open that and it's like, oh, 2 years have passed in this character's life.
Cool. Okay.
So it's really, it's not, it's certainly, outside of it being a series of graphic novels, it's really just very much like what the things that you see in the crime fiction bestseller list do repeatedly, which is just have a character get into trouble and do a story about how they get out of it, kind of. And, the big difference for us is it's our first time really doing a sort of ostensibly a good guy. Like he's definitely a messed up, convoluted, complex character, but he is definitely 100% a person trying to do the right things for his own version of the right reasons. And you can root for him, which is, for our work, not something you can often say. Often for our things, if you're rooting for the person, you're doing it with like a fingers over the eyes, like, I hope they don't die. It's definitely more of like I can't wait to see how bad this goes for this guy. So, Reckless in that way is very different, but it definitely is us looking at, at our market and our audience and saying, okay, what are they wanting, for one thing, and in giving them what they want, does it also allow us to do something brand new for us that will potentially create something that appeals to a much wider audience than has been buying graphic novels in a way. Like somebody, I can't remember who it was, somebody forwarded me something someone said online, which was that it sounded like we were trying to crack the airport bookstore Father's Day last minute gift market. But
there's nothing wrong with that.
I was like, I'll take that.
Absolutely, man. No, Jesus, how many times? And again, God only knows when we'll be flying again. But you're absolutely right in terms of that, as far as wanting to grab something for the plane or for the hotel, in between whatever you're doing and everything. But also, Ed, I got to be honest. I get what you're saying, and obviously you're seeing the sales numbers and stuff. But I also, and maybe I'm, honestly, maybe I'm just part of that diehard criminal fandom that does look forward to each comic, because there's that disconnect between what the store buys and knows they can sell or thinks they can sell, and then the audience. And sometimes it may not be the same thing. I love what you're doing, and I love this idea. And I also think that the individual comic, I mean, good Lord, we've been saying this ever since they started being, $2.50 and $2.99, where it's like, man, my $20 doesn't buy the stack of comics it used to. And now we're down to 4 or 5 if we're lucky.
Even Reckless coming out as like a hardback book will still be cheaper than if you bought 6 Marvel comics of the equivalent length.
Exactly. No, and that's why I get what you're doing. It will
seem like a bargain, I hope, because it'll be a nice package. But yeah, I will say I got, a lot of emails from people who were having trouble finding the Criminal single issues because
sure. I had to buy it.
They would go to their store on Thursday instead of Wednesday, and it would be sold out. And that's that endless frustration of doing single issue comics at all. But with graphic novels, it's like you set your print run like before you really have orders, or you have like a sense of like what people are going to order up front. But so Pulp, like we printed twice as many, just getting into the nitty gritty a little, we printed twice as many of Pulp as we had orders for from the comic market and book market. But the reorders for that book have been so fast
that's great.
We've sold through like over half of that print run already. And I have no idea. Like I thought that would last us a year. And
wow,
it's looking like, we'll see. Like, what was weird thing was like the same thing happened with Junkies a couple of years ago. Like we printed a lot. We sold good numbers, especially for an original graphic novel. Like we had really good orders from, both the book market and the comic market. But for the comic market, we had especially good numbers because a lot of stores are like, oh, like my Brubaker and Phillips readers are going to want this the first week, or they're going to go online and order it somewhere else.
Right.
So we had big numbers from a lot of retailers for these books. But we're still getting a ton of reorders, but like with Junkies, like we got down to like 500 copies and then it took months to sell the last 500. So I was like, okay. I thought we would have been done with those in like a day all of a sudden. And then it was just like, oh, that was it. And then we sold out of it like several months later and went and did the paperback edition after we won the Eisner. But
okay,
so I just feel like people are just responding to the hardbacks, they're just kind of are. And like you said, they're a book you can give to anybody,
Yes. No, my only question then is, because again, what I've always adored about Criminal is the back matter as well as the story, and isn't it interesting, Ed, that clearly you were thinking of this stuff because again, flipping through Cruel Summer and its chapters as I bought it and stuff, I'm like, oh look, there's a discussion with you and Segura and I forget who else about continuing character narrative and everything.
Yeah.
And there, so that's that.
Yeah, I was thinking about this back then because I was kind of obsessing about the idea of trying to do a version of Reckless back then, even like over a year.
Yeah. So will there be back matter in Reckless?
No. I mean, there won't be anything like that at the end of these books. If we do some kind of deluxe version at some point down the line, we might do some kind of additional stuff. But no, probably what I'll do is like the back matter kind of stuff that I would have done. I'll probably do like some kind of stuff in my newsletter or something.
All right, well, then I'll have to read. I'm going to read it a lot more closer next time.
Yeah, because like it's so hard to just do the book, but like I always said, you don't get to the end of a novel and find like a bunch of articles about movies.
No. I totally understand that, but again, I just loved.
I do feel like that too. Like I like that sort of crime club part of the back matter of Criminal.
Yes.
I want to find a way to keep that part of my life going because I miss, like in the last year, like I used to email with Kim, like every week practically. And since we're not working together regularly, like I've probably heard from, we probably emailed each other like 5 times since the pandemic started, and I was like, I realized the other day, I was like, oh, I want to send you Reckless to see what you think of it and maybe get a blurb. like she's like their movie was that she was making with Guillermo del Toro got like shut down by the pandemic, so they're waiting to film like the last third of their movie, I think.
Yeah. Jesus, I just talked to my buddy Joe Henderson, who makes Lucifer, the TV show, and it streams on Netflix now, and they couldn't finish the last episode of their 5th season because of the pandemic. So
Fargo got shut down. They still have to film like the last like quarter of the season or something. So it's like it's like endlessly delayed. Yeah, it's interesting. Like some shows that film in like Europe or Canada are setting production again and getting ready to go back in September. Or like The Witcher started filming like a couple weeks ago in like wherever they filmed, Czechoslovakia or wherever. And because other countries have actually dealt with the pandemic a lot.
We have flattened the curve.
Yeah. So it's really it's really interesting to see. Like a couple months ago, I was hearing a lot of actors were thinking, oh, I don't know about making stuff overseas because of the pandemic. But now it's like, well, it's safer to do it over there if they'll let you go to that country.
And I signed up for a John Cleese fan meet because God only knows how. I mean, I wish him no ill. I love him. And they had like, hey, if you want to do a meet and greet. And I got to talk to him for 3 minutes, and he surprised me because he's in L.A. And I'm like, I'm in Chicago. He's like, oh, I was in Chicago last week. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing on a plane? Good Lord, we're supposed to, protect you people. Don't the elderly, So no, I get it. Oh, well, and also, I'm glad to hear that you want to, in some capacity, continue those articles and stuff. Ed, I'll offer the podcast platform, and we can do audio just like we're doing now. Because honestly, I love what you're doing, and in fact, your back matter inspired me beyond what I do with comic interviews. I've been having discussions with guys like Gabe Hardman and Hilary Barta and Mike Cronenberg from Noir City. And we do a thing called Scene Missing. And we just talk about movies and just, have a nice little discussion about what we've seen. And it's much more general than the focus that you put in your articles and discussions and your essays. But I love that. And truly, it really was inspired by what you guys were doing in terms of the back of Criminal, for real.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was always really interesting but slightly frustrating was how many people seemed to think that whatever article that the issue had in the back, like if it was an article about a movie or a book or whatever, that book had specifically influenced that issue or something. And I was like, no, not at all.
No.
No, that's not what I'm saying. It's just like thematically, I would tell Kim like, oh, well, this is what happens in this issue. And then she would come back with like several different suggestions for things that thematically felt similar.
Sure.
It was like, no, I'm not saying this issue is influenced by The Killing or whatever, though.
Right. No, like you said, it's Crime Club. No, it's
Cruel Summer is influenced by The Killing.
No, it really is in print. The experience of going to a crime convention or whatever, and then just your favorite, your friends sitting down and like, oh, what did you see recently, and whatever. So no, I do want to. I want to continue doing that. And I've great.
I've enjoyed doing that. It's funny because I've been trying to do more stuff with my newsletter, and I find more people read the newsletter the shorter it is, but the longer they are, the more feedback I get. Like I was doing like comics history stuff about my own remembrances of like comics I grew up reading and how.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think that's something it's different for every generation. So like as I was thinking about all this stuff during the pandemic of like, okay, what are Sean and I going to work on next? Like there was this brief moment where after Friday had launched and was such a hit, like Friday, like the response to Friday was insane. It's like it moved a ton of units through Panel Syndicate, and the amount of email I got from readers of it just like dwarfed anything we'd ever done before. And I was just like blown away by how many people connected with it, because it's really like a very personal sort of post young adult kind of thing. And just, just very much like, this is what I like. I'm going to write something about it. And because I've got one of the greatest artists in the history of comics to draw it. So I can write all sorts of crazy stuff for Marcos Martin to draw.
Sure. Has the second issue come out yet or no?
No, that hasn't come out yet. That'll probably be a month, I'm guessing, with the way. I mean, he's inking the back half of it right now, but it's 40 pages too. So
that's cool. That's cool.
He expanded it from 34 to 40.
You were saying, you were saying last time that was possible. So yeah. And again, you guys can do as much or as little as you need to, depending on the chapter. So that's great.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But the response to it was just so intense that I was like, okay, well, maybe Sean and I should do something for Panel Syndicate, like a series of short stories or something. And then when the pandemic is over, we can collect them as like a little hardback book. I thought, maybe it would be 80 or 90 pages of short stories. Maybe do 5 or 6 short stories, and they somehow interlink. And I started notebooking it, and it was getting so complex, and the interlinking was getting so complex that I was just like, so I'm just figuring out a way to make a novel, but even more complicated. And there were elements of it that I just thought, okay, this is really interesting and unlike anything Sean and I have ever done before, but I don't know if it'll work actually, or if it'll be too much like us trying to be like David Lynchy or something. Like it just didn't feel totally like right, even though there were things about it that I was like, oh, this could be kind of interesting. And I liked the idea of putting stuff out on Panel Syndicate that would then get collected into a book.
Sure.
Because then it would be like, oh, we made this during the shutdown, and then when the shutdown's over, here's this book.
Absolutely.
But yeah, at that point, then I kind of had the other, like when I was looking at it, it just didn't feel quite right, and that's when I like started thinking again, and ended up coming back around to Reckless, and that should be our next big move. Which, God, I'm really breaking a lot of the behind the curtains of it all.
I appreciate
the magic of how you sort of fall backwards into these big decisions. But what was interesting was like, because Pulp was delayed, I had no idea what the response to Pulp would be. Like,
okay,
Pulp is a Western, which Western comics don't really sell. It's also
it is and it isn't.
Yeah, it isn't, but it looks like one from the outside.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true.
It's got a cowboy on the cover rearing a horse.
This is true.
But it's also, what it also is like a gritty Depression era crime story about an old man. These are all very like uncommercial to comics ideas, but Western old people, like this is all very non-commercial stuff that only I care about. Is how.
Well, yeah, you're not alone, but I know
not only I know I'm being facetious when I say.
But like I know you are, but like you said,
but
the
you don't do a book
somethings
like that and expect it to become you know, you don't. That's not your thing where you're like, oh, this is going to be the thing that everyone's crazy for. I assumed like Junkies, I was like, I don't know why, you know, anyone in the comics industry will care about this book. And then people went crazy for it. And I was like, well, you know, it's a very personal story, but it also has this sort of look of like a young adult graphic novel.
Absolutely, Ed. Absolutely. Well, that's
red on the cover. It's like a coming of age story.
Yeah.
So there are elements to it. But yeah, I had no clue, like when we started working on Reckless, like that Pulp was going to end up being like a huge hit. And, you know, the day before it was even getting released, I was getting emails from like retailers all over the country that were already sold out. And some of them that had ordered like over 100 copies for new release day. And like, I think Sean's local store or like one of the big stores in Portland sold like 140 copies on
wow.
the day it was available. And the reorders were just, you know, have still just been, it's only been out for a couple of weeks. And like the reorders are intense for it. And like I had already made the decision, like, okay, well, we're going to spend the next year doing original graphic novels instead.
Yeah.
You know, because the market had just sort of dictated that future to us with the shutdown. And, you know, and then, but I definitely was like, oh, okay, something's definitely happening here. It's just funny that it took us, you know, probably 2 or 3 years ago, we could have started trying to make this kind of a shift more than we did. I think we definitely baby stepped it by doing Junkies because, you know, we liked doing those magazine sized things because they were longer. And then I just thought, you know, I think Sean at one point was like, let's do like a European album. And then I was like, well, let's do one that, you know, is in a market and is in a format that the American market will appreciate. And that's how Junkies, you know, ended up being that it did, was because it was like, well, this is palatable to all audiences.
Totally. But it's a combination, and it really is a progression of what you've done in Incognito, Fade Out, Kill or Be Killed, post Criminal and during Criminal, to now allow you. I mean, I got bad news for you, Ed. You and Sean are a brand. So we kind of, as the audience, we kind of look forward to whatever you put out there.
I mean,
like, great.
We were we were always trying to be. If you'll go back to the first issues of like Sleeper and Criminal,
yes,
like especially Criminal, like our names are embedded into the logo as like huge.
But that's awesome, man. That's great.
But it was part of the plan all along. Was like we knew we were never going to just stick with one thing, and that like we would be the brand that would hopefully be, you know, that readers followed from project to project. I just, you know, I never imagined that the market would come around to that more. And I think it's just been persistence. Like, you know, if you flip to the last page of Pulp, you just see that list of all of our books, and it's like, man, we really don't quit. We just keep putting these books out. Like, I don't think if we know what else to do. So I'm like very excited that after, you know, I mean, luckily we have, you know, the big Cruel Summer oversized hardback, and then we have volume 3 of the Criminal Deluxe edition coming out in like end of October, early November or something like that. You know, but this year we really didn't, because of the pandemic, we really didn't have as many, you know, things on the market because Pulp got delayed and then, you know, everything got messed up on the schedule. So it's like, I'm so relieved we were able to get Reckless onto the December, you know, slate, because I didn't want it to be like January of next year. Like I really wanted, it's like, no, we have to get another book out this year. Like we can't.
That's great, man.
Go by where we only release like one original thing and the end of, you know, like because otherwise we only had issue 12 of Criminal out, you know, and then Pulp.
Sure.
It was like stuff. So it's like, no, you're getting like a whole like 150 page more book of ours.
That's awesome. Plus, again, the timing of Friday and Panel Syndicate when things were shut down. I mean, we all were just like, all right, what should we read? And in some cases, I'm sure people were reaching back in their pile of books that they hadn't ever they never read. But that's the thing. It was like, oh, great, there's something new. And then knowing that Pulp was coming out this summer and everything was great. And then, I agree with you in terms of Reckless. So no, really timing. I'm glad that timing has been so fortuitous to your what you want to do.
It feels weird to be like we're sitting in lockup during like one of the times in American history, and I'm like talking about how great the timing is.
Well, I know. Honestly, Ed. I mean, I've been doing video. Yeah, I mean, and truly,
a sequence of events that sort of like set off a light bulb in my head of like, okay, like part of it too was just like, what happens if the market shuts down again? I mean, I probably mentioned earlier, it's like if the market were to shut down again, we can still publish a graphic novel.
Absolutely,
like,
absolutely.
I can publish single issue comics if the market is shut down.
But that's what I've been literally the recurring conversation I've been having with all the creatives is, are you okay? Is this a block? Is it harder for you to work? Or are you adapting and finding windows? Brian said that at the beginning, when things were still at the beginning of just COVID and before the demonstrations and how the world just got heavy. But he's like, a lot of times during really stressful times, your creative gene will kick in and you don't know what you're capable of and stuff. So that's terrific, man, that you're able to adapt, honestly. And hey, that means we got great books from you guys coming up. And I'm so glad, truly going back to Sleeper, that you and Sean have been able to work out this rhythm to be able to continuously work together. Because man, I mean, I was, Sleepers where I was like, I mean, I loved your stuff both in Batman and the stuff you did with Mike Lark and everything, both Public Eye, Private Eye, the
Scene of the Crime. Yeah,
Scene of the Crime. I always confused it stupidly with the Joe Pesci movie where he's the crime photographer.
It's funny too. Like with Reckless, I'm really coming back full circle to when I first got into writing comics for a living was Scene of the Crime. Like I had done stuff here and there, but that was the beginning of this being my full-time job. Was me and Michael Lark at Vertigo doing Scene of the Crime, which I really wanted to be like a series of PI novels. And Reckless I don't actually think of as like a PI as much as he's it's an easy thing for people to say about the book without actually reading it first, but he's more of like a off the books troublemaker kind of person, like a fixer almost, as opposed to a Private Eye. He's much like you hire him to get back your stolen car from a thief, kind of person. Like somebody who goes and does dangerous things for people. It's much more of a in your face kind of pulp character, but our version of that. It's not, so it's not the Punisher or something.
Ray Donovan-y kind of.
But yeah, he's definitely like on the back cover text. He's described as part Repo Man, part Private Eye, part Wrecking Ball. And that's definitely how I think of him. But yeah, I don't remember where we were going.
No, exciting. No, it just did. Yeah. Well, again, but again, the fact that you were able to respond to the pandemic and be creative, absolutely, man.
Well, that's what's interesting about it, though, is like nothing I'm writing is because someone else was like, when are we going to see all these books inspired by the pandemic? And I just thought, I don't know a single writer who's writing right now that wants to be writing about the pandemic or what's
happening. No. Yeah.
Everybody I know was like trying to write anything. Like I'm inspired by the pandemic to write a series of graphic novels about a troublemaker in the 80s.
Right. Well, escapism. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's like, I don't want to like
think about viruses
and this during the last one. It's like, I can't wait till I, am not stressed out enough to watch The Plot Against America.
Right. Yes.
I really want to watch that. I'm a big David Simon fan. I'm not in that mind frame right now. I'm much more in the, hey, when are we going to, marathon all the Fast and Furious movies again?
Well, that's like, I heard the guys that were working on, or Noah Hawley, potentially for his Star Trek movie was going to be about a space virus. And it's like, that's not going to work. We don't care. Yeah. No, please. That's all right.
Yeah, exactly. You do that 100 years from now.
Yeah, no shit. Exactly.
When we're still doing Star Trek movies.
Let's hope so. Good Lord. That's hilarious.
All right. Well, we should probably wrap this up. My wife is giving me the eye of wanting to come back into the house with the dog.
All good. All good, Ed. Absolutely, man. No, I'm really excited. And really, Cruel Summer, terrific wrap up to the Teague Lawless story and Ricky and Fathers and Sons and Going the Wrong Way. So that's coming out in a couple weeks, or at least I looked at the Amazon solicit.
Yeah. It comes out in comic stores this week. August 12th, I guess, is its release day for comic stores, and then it's like a week or two after that for bookstores. Yeah,
it's the week after for bookstores, so that's cool. Yeah. No, that's awesome, man. And yeah, again, I'm really glad that today's circumstances, you're able to focus and redirect it into something positive and great books. Pulp was fantastic.
Oh, thanks.
Absolutely, man. If people didn't read Cruel Summer issue by issue, they're really going to enjoy the book. And really, now I am incredibly curious to see the differences issue to issue versus the changes you made in the graphic novel.
Ton of stuff, but it's definitely, I always, often when we've been putting things out in trade or hardback, I'll go through and find like some mistake or some line of dialogue that I really hate that I'm like, God, how did I miss that? And I'll make Sean change it. And I never say anything about it because I don't want people to freak out. I'm not like George Lucas here, like changing everything. But every now and then I'm like, oh, God, the 30-year-old me was an idiot.
Well, let's
and also I don't know if you've got the deluxe editions. The Cruel Summer hardback is actually a deluxe edition. It's like the deluxe edition size, and it has like a bunch of extra content at the back.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Right. Put it out. It's basically unofficially like Criminal Deluxe Volume 4.
Okay, and Volume 3 you said comes out at the end of October.
Yeah, and then we were going to have reprints of Volume 1 and 2 out that same day, but then with the pandemic and the cash flow situation with the distributor, it just wasn't feasible to send 3 like 400-page hardbacks to print the same day.
Of course. Is there any? Do you know when I'm sorry. I mean, it'll
be like Volumes 1 and 2. I think are coming out like 1 month apart in the spring or something like that. The new edition.
Okay.
Sean did like new covers for everything and new design. I think for the books a little bit, but yeah, the covers for Volume 3 and the new ones for 1 and 2 are like some of my favorite stuff he's ever done. Which I think is what like. When we were working on the Reckless cover, I just kept going back to these criminal ones. I'm like, just do something like this with this cool montage painting thing. Like these seemed really hard for you to do. They took like a week each.
And do you know when the Martini edition for Parker's coming out?
It's like either spring. It's like either late spring or early summer next year. I think. I'm not sure. Printing in like Korea or China or something like that. Our part in it is done. I'm still working on some of the extra content stuff. I did like a roundtable interview with Scott Denbier and someone else for.
Oh, that's great.
Arwen but yeah, we did a. Did we talk about this on the Friday one? We did an additional story. I don't think it is filled yet.
Yes, you did. No, you did mention that. Yes, go on.
Yeah, we did a Grofield story, which is like 17 or 18 pages long, and it's the first time that Donald Westlake's wife has given anyone else permission to write an original story of any of the characters in the Parker universe.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was. I mean, it was terrifying to write it. I was so going to hate it and saying it because it was like I pitched the idea and it was like, I don't know. And then I sort of rephrased it a little bit to try to explain it a little bit better because I didn't realize she was going to actually be really hands-on about it. Like I thought she would just be like, oh, that sounds interesting. Fine. But yeah, she was really like, oh no, I don't when I told her what the story was going to be about, she was concerned. So I had to sort of outline how it was going to be. And she was still like, oh, I don't know. And then because of that, I was like, well, what about this then? And then she was like, oh, that sounds interesting, but I still need to see a script. And, I was getting all this through Scott Denbier.
Cool.
And so I had to write the script. This was like last August or September or something. And it was like a tribute to, Darwin and to Donald Westlake, who, had died right before Darwin put out the first book. So
yeah.
Huge tragedy for Darwin, but also like I was going to do like a group interview with them for the back pages of Criminal. And so I always felt like very like, oh man, like, I didn't realize until I was writing that story, how much of my like third person writing style is just, I absorbed so much of the way he phrases sentences because he's so concise and with comics kind of just slowly evolved to that. But But so I wrote this script and I thought, oh man, like she's going to say no to this because like she's not going to be able to read a comic script and really get what, you know, she's going to have to see the comic, and we can't pay Sean to draw the comic if she says no. So
right.
But yeah, she was like, oh no, this is great. She totally approved it. And then, but then she definitely, when she saw the comic, you got a sense that it made a lot more. It meant a lot more, and she really loved it. And I know Darwin's wife, Marcia, really loved it. So I felt like so much pressure. I was like doing a tribute to two of my favorite creative people, Donald Westlake and Darwin Cook, and also trying to do something, you know, that I'd never done before, and, you know, that I would happily do for free, which is just write stories about Parker and his friends.
Totally.
So I was like, oh God, I hope I do well enough that she actually says okay, because in some ways that felt better than almost any other career achievement. I'm like, oh my God, like I've been approved.
Totally. No, absolutely. Then you're putting somebody else's sandbox. You guys sandbox.
So anti playing in other people's sandbox, but you know, Darwin Cook, you know, did such a great job on Parker, and Donald Westlake has meant so much to me. And those Richard Stark books, you know, like on my old writing shelf next to my desk when I was first starting Criminal, I had some different crime reference books. I had this little bookshelf full of like my different reference materials. And next to all those reference materials were all the Ross McDonald books and all the Parker books, like the paper. I had like basically hunted down all the paperbacks over the years. I was trying to get all the gold medal versions of them. But
that's great. Yeah.
And you know, it was like those things were my gods. Like, okay, like inspire me just through being next to you, like make me a better writer.
Totems, I get it, man. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. I still have books by those guys around me at all times.
Outstanding,
right, cool.
Man.
So we should wrap up.
Yeah, we're wrapping up, but now we do have like kind of an open promise here that like in December when Reckless is out, we'll talk.
Oh yeah. We'll come back and do we've probably talked about Reckless more than we needed to on this.
No, people are excited to hear what's coming and everything. And seriously, man, I'm really glad that you've been able to channel this in a positive way, because we can use all the positivity we can get, Ed. So nice going.
And I think just like I'm being drawn to like, some escapism, it's not because I can't see what's happening in the real world around me. It's because I want like a few hours of not thinking about it. So I realized
100%, Ed.
One of the gifts of comics that we all grew up with is it's the great way to escape everything that's going on around you, is you just sort of sit down and start reading, and you can't hear the noise outside. You're just taken away by a really great comic, and it's like, that's been my aspiration my whole career, is to like try to give that feeling to other people that, that I had. Like my whole sort of miserable childhood was, comics were such the highlight of my life. So, and I really hope that, if this works out for us, that it inspires other teams or other people to try to do this kind of stuff, in comics more, and or even just try to go straight to graphic novel on things instead of serializing them, so that, because I feel like there are probably other people who are in our position where they don't realize that they're actually kind of bifurcating their own audience in a way that might be hampering their own success.
Understood. Absolutely, man.
Like once you get to a point where your readership is following you to these deluxe hardback things in real number, then, you might actually be doing better off just focusing on those. You might sell more of those. You might, it might be a better use of your time and effort in some ways, and you might end up doing something that you wouldn't have been able to do if you were serializing it,
Absolutely, man. As always, I appreciate your observations, and we will reconvene in December for a new talk with Ed Brubaker. Say it again?
I'll let you know how it goes.
All right, buddy. Great talk. Take care, man.
I'll talk to you later, man.
Ed Brubaker on Word Balloon. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Now, you heard him. We're going to talk again in December about Reckless when it comes out, and we'll get an idea of what Ed and Sean and Jacob have in store for us for 2021. But man, it's so great to hear Ed. I missed him. I know he was really busy with his television writing, but I'm glad he's made the time to come back to the Word Balloon audience and have these great conversations, because I've always respected Ed's point of view, as I said in the close, and it's great to hear what he's thinking about in this ever-changing comic book market. Thanks a lot for listening to Word Balloon today. It was all brought to you by my super team, the League of Word Balloon listeners, and their great support via Patreon, patreon.com/wordballoon. Word Balloon is also brought to you by Curiosity Stream. Don't forget, you can get an entire year of Curiosity Stream with great documentaries in all the subjects that you want to see: travel, science, history, food, amazing productions, top quality video from Curiosity Stream. Don't forget to use the code WordBalloon to sign up for just $14.99 for the whole year. Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. A great library of books are waiting for you from the Aftershock imprint. Joe Pruitt, Mike Martz, the whole creative team doing a great job of curating these books and picking great creators that really have some genre-bending ideas that deserve your attention. Don't forget about Steve Orlando and Philip Kennedy Johnson's Kill a Man, coming in October. The cutoff to order that book is September 14th, and it's a great MMA action book that deserves your attention. There's also Animosity from Marguerite Bennett and Dark Red from Tim Seeley about a vampire in the Midwest trying to get by. There's Cullen Bunn's Dark Ark, the Noah story retold in Cullen Bunn's fashion. Cullen has a lot of supernatural graphic novels that deserve your attention at Aftershock. So does Marguerite Bennett. Stephanie Phillips currently kicking ass with Artemis and the Assassin. A great back catalog of science fiction ideas from people like Paul Jenkins. Some horror from Brian Azzarello. A superhero story from Mark Waid. Great stuff that deserves your attention from the Aftershock library. Go to their website. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages of art, and the diamond codes on how to order these books through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Thanks again for listening to Word Balloon. It's going to be a great week. We're going to present more panels from Mainframe Comic-Con, like the AWA Crime Panel, Spotlight Conversations with David Pepos and Erica Schultz. My buddy Chip Zdarsky and I had another great conversation from Mainframe Comic-Con. So many great panels, plus a few live shows as well. I hope you're enjoying what we're doing here at Word Balloon, and I'm happy to bring you this great entertainment every week. Until next time, thanks for listening. Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2020. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.